The saloon smelled of sweat, stale whiskey, and unwashed bodies. It was the kind of place where dreams came to die, where men gambled away wages they hadn't earned yet and shouted to drown out the silence that waited for them outside. Tonight the lamps burned low, smoke curled heavy, and laughter broke against the walls like crashing waves. At a corner table, 5 men leaned close, their voices slurred, their breath rank with liquor. And in the middle of them, pulled in like prey dragged into a pit, was Anna. Her wrists bore the bruises of a struggle. Her hair was a tangled crown of dust and defiance. She was no more than 19, her dress torn at the shoulder, her eyes wide with fear, yet shining with something fiercer than terror. They jeered as they shoved her onto a table, one man clutching her arm, while another lifted a bottle high as if to toast. "How much for the girl?" someone laughed, voice thick, words stumbling. "A bottle? 2? Hell, I'll trade 3 full crates if she keeps that fire in her eyes." The others roared in agreement, slapping the wood, spilling their whiskey like it was nothing. Their voices rose, sharp, ugly, mocking the worth of a young woman as though she were no more than a mule in the marketplace. Anna thrashed against their grip, kicking at the legs of the man who held her. Her nails raked across another's cheek, leaving crimson streaks that only made them laugh harder. She spat into the face of the one who leaned too close, and her voice broke in a raw cry. "I'm not yours to sell!" But the words only fueled them. They howled and pressed closer, raising the stakes, their drunken chorus a grotesque parody of an auctioneer's chant. The room, once filled with the usual card games and quiet shadows, now throbbed with spectacle. Eyes turning, coins clinking, a cruel entertainment at the expense of a girl who refused to break. Anna seized the nearest chair and hurled it across the room, the crash of splintering wood silencing the crowd for the barest moment. Then came the rush of boots, the bark of laughter, the slap of hands as she fought like a wild thing cornered. The saloon shook with her resistance, each cry echoing through the dusty rafters, each defiant kick striking against the certainty of men who believed whiskey worth more than her dignity. And then the door groaned open, not with the reckless slam of a drunkard, nor the careless stumble of a gambler, but with the slow, deliberate weight. Cold air spilled in, brushing against the heat and smoke, and the lamplight flickered as if uncertain. Boots crossed the threshold, measured, unhurried, carrying a presence that made the laughter falter before it fully died. He was tall, the kind of tall that shadows stretched to follow. A dust-worn duster hung from broad shoulders, and under the brim of his hat eyes glinted like flint catching fire. His silence was louder than any gunshot. It cut sharper than Anna's prize, sharper than the raucous taunts. The room shifted as he moved, one hand loose at his side, the other resting easy, too easy, on the worn leather of his holster. He didn't speak, didn't need to. Every man in that room knew the weight of silence when carried by a man who had lived with violence long enough to no longer fear it. The crowd held its breath, whiskey dripping from forgotten bottles, the air thick with dust that dared not move. Anna's chest heaved, her fists clenched, her body trembling from the fight she had not yet lost. She turned toward him, her hair falling across her face, eyes locked on the stranger as if he were the first solid thing in a world that had tilted cruelly against her. In that moment, time seemed to hang like the final note of a hymn. No one laughed anymore. No one jeered or raised a glass, all eyes fixed on the man whose entrance promised reckoning. His fingers flexed against the grip of his revolver, a slow, deliberate reminder that the night's cruel game had reached its end. The story of Anna did not begin in the saloon, though the smoke-filled room and the jeers of drunken men seemed at first glance to define her. To understand the fire in her eyes, the wildness in her struggle, one must go back, back to a time when she was a child and the world still seemed like a place where dreams might grow. Anna never knew the warmth of a mother's steady arms or the strength of a father's guiding hand. She had no memory of lullabies sung softly in the night, no memories of laughter echoing within 4 safe walls. Her earliest recollections were of the road, wagon wheels creaking over dirt, the sound of bargaining voices trading her fate like a commodity. She was 5 years old when she first learned the meaning of being owned. Passed from one cruel guardian to the next, she worked wherever she was told, washing floors until her hands cracked, scrubbing dishes until her back ached, or minding other people's children who had more toys in their cribs than she had possessions in her life. Some households kept her only until her presence became inconvenient. Then she would be sold again, like a chicken at a market, her name forgotten as soon as she stepped out the door. She learned quickly never to expect permanence, never to cling, never to hope that kindness would last. And yet, in the quiet hours, when the stars cut sharp across the prairie sky, she would whisper to herself a vision so fragile it almost seemed like a sin. A little piece of land where no one could throw her out, a horse of her own, and a place to rest where no one could call her property. But the world did not favor such fragile dreams. As Anna grew older, her face took on a beauty that the men around her noticed, and that beauty became its own prison. She was 12 when the first man tried to barter her smile for liquor, laughing as though the value of her existence could be measured in bottles. She escaped that time, running barefoot through the desert night until her feet bled, but there was always another man, another hand reaching to claim her, another voice offering coin or whiskey or favors in exchange for her life. By 16, she had long since given up on being rescued. She worked as a ranch hand when she could, sleeping in barns, sweeping floors, sometimes being allowed a plate of food at the edge of someone's table. She watched other girls her age marry, inherit land, cradle babies in their arms, while she drifted from place to place, unwanted except for her labor or her body. The cruelty of others did not hollow her out. It hardened her, shaped her into someone who carried her own armor in her spirit. She learned to fight back, to claw and kick and spit when someone tried to force her into submission. Each scar, each bruise became a mark of survival, a declaration that she had not gone quietly into the fate others chose for her. When she dreamed now, she did not imagine gentleness. She imagined freedom wrested from the world's fists, a horse beneath her and dust rising behind her, a place where no man could set a price on her name. And so, on the night when laughter echoed through the saloon and voices barked out bids as though she were no more than a mule tied for auction, Anna did not think of herself as a victim. She thought only of survival. If the world saw her as a commodity, she would fight like a creature whose soul could not be purchased. She would make them bleed before they drank from their bottles. She would remind them with every scratch of her nails and every desperate cry that she was human and that she was not theirs.
The air inside the saloon grew thick with smoke and fear. A moment ago it had been filled with raucous laughter, the clink of bottles, the crude shouts of men bargaining, as if Anna were nothing more than cattle on the block. Now silence pressed against the walls like a storm waiting to break. The bat-wing doors still swayed behind the figure who had stepped through them. He moved slowly, deliberate, a man carved from the dust and scars of the frontier. His boots struck the wooden floor with a measured rhythm, each step drawing every eye away from the trembling girl and fixing it upon him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a hat pulled low that shadowed most of his face. Yet it was not his stature that stilled the laughter. It was his presence, the kind of presence that carried death in its wake, the kind that men recognized without needing an introduction. His hand hovered near the revolver strapped to his thigh, fingers brushing the worn handle like an old friend. He did not need to shout, nor posture with the false bravado of drunken men. He simply stood, eyes sharp as steel, and the entire room felt the shift of power. Anna, panting from her struggle, her wrists bruised from rough hands, froze in that moment. Her chest rose and fell, hair hanging in wild strands across her face. For an instant she thought this newcomer was just another man come to join the bidding, another shadow in the long line of men who saw her less than human. But then he spoke, his voice low, steady, the kind of voice that rumbled from deep in the chest, scarred by dust and distance. "Let her go." 2 words, nothing more, but they cut through the haze of whiskey and smoke like the crack of a whip. The men who held Anna burst into nervous laughter. The largest of them, his beard matted and eyes glassy with liquor, turned toward the cowboy with mock surprise. "You got a bottle to trade, stranger?" he jeered, shoving Anna forward as though to tempt him. "Or maybe a gold coin tucked in them boots of yours? 'Cause this girl ain't free." The cowboy didn't answer. He didn't need to. His gaze, steady and unflinching, was fixed on the man's throat, as if he already measured where the bullet would land. It was the gaze of someone who had seen blood spilled under desert suns, who knew the worth of silence better than any wasted word. The laughter began to falter. One by one, the men shifted uncomfortably. They saw it now, what lived in his eyes. The weight of death, carried so long it became familiar, almost casual. This was not some drifter come to bluff. This was a man who had pulled the trigger before and would again, without hesitation. Anna's knees weakened beneath her. For so long she had fought alone, clawing and kicking, her voice breaking into hoarse screams that no one cared to hear. But now someone stood before her, someone who did not leer or laugh, someone who did not calculate her worth in bottles of whiskey. His silence was not cruel. It was protective. It was terrifying. The men hesitated, exchanging glances. Then one, younger than the rest, drunker too, tried to recover the bravado that was slipping fast. He smirked, spat tobacco on the floor, and sneered, "Ain't nobody tells us what to do in our own saloon." With a reckless flourish, he pulled a knife from his belt and stepped forward. The motion was fast, but the cowboy's hand was faster. In a heartbeat, steel cleared leather, and the deafening crack of a revolver split the night. Smoke coiled in the dim lantern light. The knife clattered to the ground, its edge nicking the floorboards. The young man staggered back, clutching his hand, blood already seeping through his fingers where the bullet had grazed him. Silence. Pure, crushing silence. No one moved. No one breathed. The whiskey bottles trembled on the counter where the barkeep froze, pale as ash. The laughter that had filled the air moments earlier was gone, replaced by the echo of a single gunshot that seemed to hang in the rafters like a curse. The cowboy's gun still smoked, his stance unshaken. His eyes swept the room, daring another to test his resolve. None did. Anna could not look away. Her body trembled, caught between fear and a dawning dangerous flicker of hope. This man, this stranger, had stepped between her and the wolves without demanding a price. She searched his face, but his hat brim shadowed all but the hard line of his jaw and the faint scar that curved along his cheek. His silence frightened her as much as it steadied her. Men who talked often had motives. Men who stayed quiet, they carried ghosts. One of the older drunks finally broke. He raised his hand slowly, muttering, "We don't want trouble, mister. No trouble at all." His voice cracked, stripped of the arrogance it had carried only minutes earlier. One by one, the others followed, backing away from Anna as though she were a rattlesnake about to strike. The cowboy did not lower his weapon until every hand was empty, until every step had put distance between the girl and her captors. Only then did he move, not with urgency, but with that same unshakable calm. He stepped closer, his spurs clinking softly in the dead hush of the room. Anna felt her heart pound against her ribs as he came near. For the first time, she met his eyes. They were not the eyes of a savior from the story she used to whisper to herself at night. They were tired, shadowed, carrying too much weight for one man to bear. Yet within them burned something fierce and unyielding, a promise not spoken but undeniable. As long as he stood here, no one would touch her. Anna swallowed hard, her throat raw. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to demand why, but the words tangled on her tongue. He said nothing, only kept his revolver raised until at last he holstered it with a practiced motion, the room exhaling in relief as the danger seemed to settle. In that fragile stillness, Anna realized the truth. She was not alone anymore. And though she did not yet know his name, though she did not understand why he had risked himself for her, she felt it, the first fragile spark of trust she had known in years. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping before she could stop it. Why did you help me?" The cowboy did not answer. He only tipped his hat slightly, his gaze lingering a moment longer before shifting back to the men who still loitered, cowed and broken by fear. The silence stretched, heavy but strangely comforting. And in that silence, Anna's hope began to breathe again. The night wind was cold as Jack led Anna out of the town. Her steps faltered at first, her body bruised and sore, but he kept a steady pace, never rushing her, never slowing down. The saloon doors had shut behind them, the jeers replaced by the pounding of her own heartbeat. The town's lanterns dwindled in the distance, swallowed by the vast, indifferent dark of the frontier. They walked until Anna could barely feel her legs. Every shadow felt like a pursuer, every gust of wind carried the echo of laughter and violence. Yet Jack did not speak. His silence was heavier than any words. He was a wall between her and the world, a figure both intimidating and strangely reassuring. At last they reached the edge of an abandoned ranch, little more than a sagging barn and a broken corral left to the weeds. Jack pushed open the warped door of the barn, the hinges groaning, and guided her inside. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of old hay. He moved with the familiarity of someone who had sought refuge in places like this before, his hands sure as he gathered kindling and struck flint. Sparks flared, then caught, and soon a small fire glowed in the center, its light chasing away the worst of the darkness. Anna lowered herself to the ground, wrapping her arms around her knees. She felt raw, like every nerve in her body was exposed. The firelight danced across Jack's face, carving his features into sharp relief, the lines of exhaustion, the quiet strength in his jaw, the unreadable shadows in his eyes. He pulled a worn blanket from his saddlebag and draped it over her shoulders without a word. The weight of it startled her. No one had covered her with anything since she was a child. She gripped the edges tightly, unsure whether to be grateful or suspicious. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Why are you helping me?" Her tone was sharp, defensive. "Men don't just do things like this. They don't risk their lives for nothing." He didn't look at her. He crouched by the fire, tossing in another piece of wood, the sparks rising and vanishing into the rafters. His silence pressed on her nerves until she snapped. "What do you want from me?" Anna's voice rose, ragged with anger and fear. "Do you expect me to pay you back somehow? With what? I've got nothing. Do you understand? Nothing left to give." Still, No answer. He just stared into the flames, his face unreadable. Her chest heaved, and before she knew it, she was on her feet, fists clenched. "Say something! Anything! Don't just sit there like I'm some stray dog you picked up off the street. Tell me why!" The barn echoed with her shout. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. Her breath came fast, her throat tight. She hated herself for how desperate she sounded, but she couldn't stop. At last, Jack spoke. His voice was low, gravel rough, like words pulled through years of dust and pain. "Because I've seen it before." Anna froze. He didn't look at her. He couldn't. His eyes stayed on the fire, the flickering flames reflected in them. "My sister," he said slowly. "They sold her too. Just a girl, same age as you." His jaw tightened, the scar along his cheek twisting as he spoke. "And no one pulled the trigger for her." The fire popped, a burst of sparks shooting upward. Anna felt her knees weaken as the words sunk in. Jack's hand rested loosely on his knee, his other hand curling unconsciously into a fist. "I was too far away, too late. I never found her again. I never even got to bury her." His voice faltered, just barely, but it was enough to make the air between them heavy with unspoken grief. For a long moment, Anna couldn't breathe. She pressed her hand to her mouth, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. The truth of his words cut deeper than any blade. He knew, he understood, not in theory, not as pity, but in the raw way only someone who had lost the same could understand. Her eyes burned, but she tried to fight it. She had spent years hardening herself against tears, teaching her body that crying was useless, that pain only invited more cruelty. But now, in the dim light of that broken barn, the dam inside her cracked. The first sob tore through her chest before she could stop it. She turned away, covering her face, ashamed of how broken she sounded. But once the tears started, they came in a flood. She sank to the ground, curling against the blanket, shaking as the years of swallowed grief ripped free. Jack didn't move toward her. He didn't try to shush her or offer hollow words. He just sat by the fire, silent as ever, his eyes fixed on the flames. But his presence was steady, grounding, like the earth beneath her knees. Anna cried until she thought she had nothing left, until her body ached with the effort of it. At last, her sobs softened to hiccups, then to silence. The barn smelled of smoke and dust, the fire casting long shadows on the wooden walls. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, ashamed, but strangely lighter, as if part of the weight she had carried had finally been shared. She glanced at Jack. He hadn't looked at her once while she wept, and somehow that made it easier. In a hoarse voice, she asked, Do you ever stop seeing it? The faces? The way they looked at the end?" Jack finally turned his head toward her. His eyes were dark, endless in their depth. "No," he said simply. "You carry it. It changes you, but it doesn't have to own you." Anna held his gaze. Something inside her shifted, fragile and terrifying. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, truly seen, in all her jagged, broken edges. The silence between them stretched, but it was no longer empty. It was full of understanding, of scars laid bare under the firelight. Anna pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for pulling the trigger." Jack didn't reply, but the firelight flickered in his eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, she thought she saw the faintest trace of something softer there. Not peace, not yet, but the memory of it. Outside, the wind howled across the empty plains, carrying with it the echoes of a cruel world. But inside the barn, By the fire's glow, two broken souls shared the same silence, and for a fleeting moment it felt like shelter.
The night did not last long. In that abandoned camp, with firelight flickering and shadows stretching against the old timber walls, Anna finally allowed herself to breathe. Her tears had left her hollow, but also strangely lighter, as though Jack's words had opened a door she had kept bolted shut. He had seen the same cruelty. He had known the same kind of loss. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone in her pain. But peace was a fragile thing in the West. Beyond the circle of firelight, the dark was not empty. Somewhere out there, men were saddling their horses, cursing into the night, loading rifles with trembling hands. Whiskey had burned through their veins, and greed had carved their souls. They had lost their prize, and men like that never let go without trying to claw it back. Anna sensed it before she heard it, a kind of tightness in her chest, a prickle at the back of her neck. She pulled the blanket tighter and glanced toward Jack. He was sitting across from her, hat pulled low, silent as stone, but his hand rested on the grip of his revolver. He didn't look at her. He didn't need to. He knew too. Hours later, just before dawn, the sound of hooves broke the silence. Not one horse, not two, many. The earth seemed to tremble with them. Anna stiffened, the blanket falling away. Jack rose slowly, calm as though he had been waiting all along. His voice was low, steady, without a trace of fear. "They're coming." Anna's throat tightened. "What do we do?" He handed her the second gun he carried, a smaller Colt that had seen years of wear. She stared at it, the metal cold against her palm. Her whole life, men had forced weapons into her world, but never into her hand. She looked up at him, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can." Jack's eyes, shadowed by his hat, held hers. "You can. Tonight you choose, not them." The word struck something deep. For years she had been an object, a bargain, a body others claimed. But in his quiet way, Jack was telling her she could be more, her own. Her hand tightened around the gun. The riders came fast. Their shouts split the morning air, crude voices laced with fury and drink. Anna and Jack moved to the edge of the ruined camp, standing side by side as the men closed in. Dust rose like smoke behind the horses, the first rays of dawn streaking the horizon in blood-red light. Anna's heart pounded, but there was no place left to run, no cellar to hide in, no locked door to shield her, only this broken camp, this man beside her, and the cold steel in her hand. She steadied her breath. The first rider pulled up, sneering down at them. His face was lined and hard, eyes glassy from whiskey. He spat into the dirt and pointed his rifle. "Hand her over, cowboy. Ain't no sense dying for damaged goods." Jack didn't flinch. His voice carried like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "She ain't yours." The rider laughed, mean and sharp. More men circled in, half a dozen, maybe more, their weapons glinting in the light. Anna felt her hands trembling, but Jack's shoulder brushed hers, solid and unyielding. She drew strength from that quiet presence. Another man shouted, "You got no right! She was bought fair!" Anna's voice broke free before Jack could answer. It was raw, fierce, carried by every scar and every wound inside her. "I am not yours to buy!" The mob jeered, some laughing, others swearing. They didn't see her as anything more than a prize slipping from their grasp. But for the first time, Anna wasn't speaking to them. She was speaking for herself. The standoff snapped like a whip. A shot rang out, splintering wood behind Jack's head. Instinct took over. He drew and fired in one fluid motion, dropping the first rider from his horse. Chaos erupted.
Anna ducked, heart hammering, the sound of gunfire ripping the air. Jack moved like he was born of battle, steady, precise. But there were too many. The outlaws fanned out, trying to flank them, yelling curses drowned by the thunder of pistols. Anna crouched behind a broken beam, the revolver clutched tight. Her breath came ragged, her ears rang, but Jack's words echoed inside her. "Tonight, you choose." She forced her shaking hands to steady, lifted the gun, and aimed at the man charging toward them. His face twisted with rage, his rifle raised. She squeezed the trigger. The recoil jolted her, the sound deafening, but the man fell. For a heartbeat she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then something shifted deep inside her. She was no longer prey, she was fighting. The battle dragged on, brutal and relentless. Anna fired again and again until the weight in her chest loosened, until fear gave way to something stronger. She wasn't hiding behind Jack, she was standing with him. Every shot was a scream, every pull of the trigger a breaking chain. By the time the sheriff arrived with his deputies, the camp was a haze of gun smoke and dust. Bodies lay scattered, groans of the wounded mixing with the cries of terrified horses. The sheriff, a grizzled man with sharp eyes, took one long look at the scene. What in God's name happened here? Jack holstered his revolver, his chest rising with slow, controlled breaths. "Outlaws," he said simply, "trying to sell what they had no right to." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Anna. Her hair was tangled, face streaked with tears and soot, but she stood tall, the revolver still in her grip. He seemed to understand without needing explanation. With a nod to his men, he barked orders. The outlaws were rounded up, their weapons stripped, curses silenced with rough hands and rope. Anna lowered the gun at last, her arms trembling from exhaustion. She felt the dawn wash over her, gold light spilling across the broken camp, warming her skin. She turned to Jack. He looked at her, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. But his eyes held something steady, something unspoken, like a promise carved into stone. Her voice cracked, soft but clear. "You didn't just save me. You gave me back to myself." For a long moment, Jack said nothing. Then he tipped his hat, his silence speaking louder than any vow. The sun climbed higher, painting the fields in shades of fire and gold. Smoke curled from the last embers of their campfire, rising into the endless sky. Anna stood beside the cowboy who had risked everything, and for the first time in her life, she felt unchained. She was not whiskey. She was not a prize. She was a woman reborn in the light of a western dawn. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew she would not walk it alone. A cowboy, a girl once sold, and a morning where mercy rose from the ashes.